We are right at the top of Daf Samach Beis Amud Aleph. We're learning about how to decipher, thank you very much, different expressions made on a star. The main halacha that we learned yesterday was Rav Nachman's halacha, that sometimes a person won't put the exact accurate perimeter of the field in the star. He actually might write a bigger border that's easier to understand and to express when he's really only selling part of what's in the perimeter of what he described in this contract of sale. The only time you say that he included everything if he added the following clause to the contract, which said "Lo shayris bizvini alin kadamai klum." There's nothing that I'm retaining for myself within this perimeter. If he writes that, then and only then do we say that he meant to sell everything in the perimeter. So one of the examples Rav Nachman gave was if someone was selling an apartment in an apartment building, and for the address, he just gave the address of the apartment building. So he didn't really mean to sell the whole apartment building, but that was the easiest way to express it. And I suggested if you look on the bulletin board here in Daguda, sometimes when agents are advertising a condominium, they put a picture of the building up. They're not selling the whole building, but that's the norm. It's the easiest way to describe the unit that you're trying to sell. The shouldn't be nervous by all the pictures. There are no geometrical formulas in today's Gemara. Talk the Heilige Gemara. Meter loy, meter echad oruch, umeter echad chotzer. So what happened over here? Very simple. I'm going to reference this picture here at the side. You have a field that's, let's say, 100 amas by 100 amas. That's a total of 10,000 square amas. But what you did is you said I'm going to use it the south side. On the south side, you have the border of Shimon's field, which Shimon actually had a field that was also 1,000 amas. So by saying it's the border of Shimon's field, you're talking about 1,000 amas. Then you said the north border is Chaim Yankel's field. He had 1,000 amas of field on this side. And then you had the south border was Beryl Shmerel's field. He also had a field of 1,000 amas. Over here, there were actually two people who had. David had a field that was 500 amas, and Zvulun had a field that was another 500 amas. So what he did is he listed off all four sides, but the fourth side, he didn't list off the complete side. So, in fact, it was 500 by 1,000 by 1,000 by 1,000. That's what he did. So the halacha is mecher loy mecher echad orach u mecher echad kotzer. Amrav loy kana ela keneged hakotzer. So instead of being kana 1,000 by 1,000, 1,000 by 1,000. I think I said 100 by 100 because the math is easier. Instead of being kind of 100 by 100, which should have been all 10,000 square feet, it's 50 by 100 is what he sold, which is the rectangular property, which is half of that, which is 5,000 square amas. Let's have a look at Rishpam. The western border was 100 amas. So what he's calling this east, because in the olden days, I forgot to say this, in the olden days, maps, the top was always east. Nowadays, the tops of all of our maps are north. But in those days, in Rashi days, the top of the map was east. So the east, for the eastern border, he only identified 50 amas. But for the western border, he identified all 100 amas. And then for the northern border and southern border, he also identified all 100 amas. Oh, because he made it modern. Okay. Umeitzer Mizrachi connect the Katzer no nama. Shaloigia ela at Chatzi Asada. Umeitzer Shal Tzofa in the Dorim. Miyamin Umismoil. So you see Rashi's map had east at the top. Mina Mizrach Aramayr Kuzet. So the halach is you're not going to Keneged a Katzer because he really only means half the field. Keneged Meitzar Mizrachi Yikna. He'll be koine as many amas as he identified in the eastern border, which was only 50 amas. So he's in fact telling 50 by 100. The Hainu Chatzi Asada. Umeitzer Mayravi. Shehu Aruch Mitzarim Herchavai. So if he's only giving 50 amas, why did he identify all 100 amas of the length of the western border? That's the same as far as Nachman said. Mitzarim Herchavai. Some people will express a larger perimeter. The Meitzer Shalom Putrich Lichtay B'Shtar. You couldn't write. Remember, I said that all 100 amas of border was Keneged Reuven's field, right? You don't say Keneged half of Reuven's field. That's not a clear way of saying things. Rashbam will repeat that again later. You don't ever say a border half of someone's field. So therefore, he just says this: the western border was Reuven's field. Okay, come out. Correct the Gemara, Pasha the Kasha. Amrulay, Rav Kahana, Rav Asi, L'Rav. Why do you say that you're only kind of half? The Yikna Keneged Roish Tur. You should be kind of like this. If this is the border and this is the border, draw a diagonal line. So instead of only being kind of the half, which is 50 by 100, which is 5,000 square amas, the other rectangular, 50 by 100, he should be kind of half of that. So let him be kind of the diagonal. And let's say that the borders that he offered up were actually accurate. Zok the Heilige Rashbam, Keneged Roish Tur, Claimer, Ha Ikalomeimar. This is what you can argue. The Davka Kotzer Loy Meitzer Marav Aruch, Umeitzer Mizrach Kotzer. You know why he did that? It was with intent. It wasn't Laharchav Esakvol. As the Bach says in Ois Beis, the Yikne, the Mizrach Kotzer, right, is Kedei, Liknois Meitzer Marav, Mea Amo, V'Oyer HaMeitzer. Let's say the long border that he gave, he meant it for real. It wasn't just Hirchev HaMeitzer. Umeitzer Mizrach was Chamishimam. And he's not selling a square property. He's selling a property that has four sides, but they're not parallel. The Heichidami, Kegoyin Sheyikna Kol Asad, Balachsoin, Keneged Rosh Hashurais, Shal Mizrach Umar Kazet. Draw a straight line to follow the borders that he gave, and in fact, you're going to end up with, instead of only 5,000 square amas, it'll actually be 7,500 square amas. That's what it should have done. Shosik, when Rav was approached by his two important main Talmidim, Han and Rabasi, he didn't answer, which would indicate that he was moided to them. Zok to Gemara, Shosik Rav. But Umoide Rav would agree, which the Rashbam sticks in, Umoide Rav Mekameda Ishtik. Even before he accepted their correction, so Rashbam is assuming that Rav agreed at the end. He changed his mind. And in fact, you are kind of the 7,500 square amas, the Roish Tur. But even before they approached him, he would have agreed in a different case. And we'll get to that in a second. He agreed with their argument as well. So even before he was Shoisik, he would have agreed in the following case. I was talking all the time where there was one person who bordered each of his four sides. But what if each of his neighbors, he had a field that was 100 amas by 100 amas. But what if each of his neighbors only had fields that were 50 amas wide? So on each of his borders, there were actually two different fields. So instead of having four neighbors, he actually had 8 neighbors. Umeitzer Levi v'Yehuda mechad gisa. So if you look down over here, you could see Reuben and Shimon are on the east, because in the old days, again, the maps had the east on top. I think Yitzhak told me that the art scroll changes the orientation of the map to have north on top. But in the olden days, they used to have east on top. So Reuben and Shimon were on this eastern border. Levi and Yehuda were on this western border. So what would be the case there? Reuben v'Shimon mechad gisa. There, he didn't have to write a half a border. Reuben connected Levi, Shimon connected Yehuda. In this case, if he only wanted to sell 50 by 100, which is half of the field, what he should have wrote is Shimon and Yehuda. And who that this guy that the north and south we're not focusing on. So let's say Shimon, Shemer Barrel, and Yehuda. And there, he doesn't have to say it's half of a gvul, because Yehuda had all 50 feet, but it stopped there, all 50 amas. So in such a case, yet he still wrote Reuben and Shimon connected Yehuda. There it's clear Shema Minah connected Rosh Yehuda, because he had a very easy way to describe borders that were exactly what he wanted to sell, which was half of the field, yet he didn't. He purposely stuck in Reuven. If he purposely stuck in Reuven, that means he does want to extend the eastern border, and he for sure wants to do the Rosh. So even before they pointed out to him, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi pointed out to him that that's how it should be, in a case where this is not what happened, but in the case where this happened, for sure, he would agree that it's Rosh Tov. Okay, let's have a look at the Rashbam. You see how, you're going to see this Rashbam, how accurately they analyze the Gemara, because there's going to be a question of Grisoyas over here. I'm just going to highlight it. I'm not going to go through it in detail. And you see how it looks, Reuben, Shimon. Who's after Shimon? Levi. So one of the shaylas that Tosfos raises is, why would it be Shimon connected Yehuda? Should it be Shimon connected Levi? You should say it should go in order. The way it should have been expressed was Shimon connected Levi, because Levi came before Yehuda. It should have been Yehuda who got left out, not Levi who got left out. So they changed Gersois, but it doesn't change the pshat in the Gemara. It's just how makbid they were, how accurate they were, and even which name to use first, and how to which property to include, which not. But let's have a look at the Rishbam. Heicha the Ika Meitzer Reuven v'Shimon Mizrach u'Meitzer Levi v'Yehuda Kenegdon b'Mayr. V'Reicha b'Asad Koval. We still are dealing with a 10,000 square on a field, 100 by 100. Bava Meitzer Levi Keneged Reuven. Levi owned a field of 50 feet wide, opposite Reuven. So Levi was on the western border of this property, and he had a field that was 50 amas wide. And Reuven was on the eastern border, but they were opposite each other. Nunama, the Meitzer Yehuda Keneged Shimon Nunama, and Shimon had also 50 amas of border with this field as Yehuda as well. Shimon on the east and Yehuda on the west. The Chaz of Eloi B'Shtar, and the words of the Shtar said as follows: Meitzer Reuven v'Shimon min ha-Mizrach u'Meitzer Yehuda min ha-Ma'ir. The Hainu Meitzer Ma'iravi Tzas is only part of the Meitzer Ma'iravi, the Levi Yisrael, and he didn't mention anything about Levi. There he's clearly stating what he wants. Hacha Moed Rav the Yikna Keneged Rosh Tur. There surely he'll be kind of Keneged Rosh Tur. You have a boy Moicher Lahaknois Keneged Akotzer. If he only wanted to sell half the field, there was a very clear way that he could have expressed that. Hachi Hava Leila Michtav v'Shimon Keneged Yehuda, and that would have been exactly what he wanted, half the field. Klemer Meitzar Mizrachi Shehu Aruch Lo Yikna. Don't be kind of the whole Meitzar Mizrachi. Ela Yehuda Keneged Shimon the Hainu Chati Yosy. Umedloi Kasalachi says he didn't write that. Rather, on one side, he included the entire border of 100 amas. Shema Minah Keneged Rosh Tur Karmelai. He had a very easy, clear, and concise way where he could have outlined a field that was 50 by 100. Yet he made one of the borders 100, that shows that he wants to include half of the second half of the field. But the place where Rav had originally learned that he's only selling half the field, and he only agreed after Rav Asi and Rav Kahana approached him, that's Mari Kagoin Reuven V'Shimon, was the Meitzah Mizrachi, but Yehuda was the Meitzah Marav Keneged Shneya. So the other border, you couldn't split in half because it all belonged to Yehuda, the 100 on the border, the western border. The Chos of Loi, Yehuda Meitzar Marav, the Shimon Meitzar Mizrach, the Hainu Echad Orach, V'Echad Katzer, Hasam Moikana, Ela Keneged HaKatzer. There, Rav had originally said, you're only going to 50 by 100, only half of the Gvul of Yehuda, even though he said all of Yehuda's Gvul. The Baal Korachach made Tzimar of Hirchavna. He had no choice. He had to say the whole Gvul for the Ma'ariv, because Yehuda owned the whole thing. So Lo Yachal Afarish, V'Shimon Keneged Chatzi Yehuda. Ki Heicha, She'ein Kosh from the Chatzi Meitzah. Because whenever you are describing a border, you'll mention the party who has the field on the other side of that border, but you'll never say half of it. That's just not a way that people spoke in those days. So that's why Rav had a havamina to say that it just hirchev loy mitzarim, but Lemaisa he agreed to Rav Kahana and Rav Asi when they approached him. Okay. Near the Hachar Yosinan with the Havel Lemichtav Reuben Keneged Levi. So you see there's a sensitivity in the Rishonim that the Gemara should have used examples that exclude Yehuda because he was the fourth son, rather than Levi, who was the third son. It took me a while to chop that's what Rishpam was talking about. Because I didn't dream that was an issue. Okay, but you see how they were mocked on understanding every syllable of the Gemara. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Meitzah Ruvain Mizrach Umayr. So Reuven had a field on the east side of this field and on the west side of this field. So therefore, Meitzah Reuven Mizrach Umayr, Umeitzah Shimon Tzafon V'Dar. So if you just write Reuven and Shimon, it might not work because maybe it's one Reuven and one Shimon. Maybe I'm just describing an L. So the halacha is Tzarich L'Michtav Lei Meitzah Reuven Ruchen Train. Reuven is a neighbor on two borders. Umeitzah Shimon Ruchen Train. And Shimon is a neighbor on two borders, so you're actually clarifying that it's a square field with four borders, two with Reuven and two with Shimon. Let's have a look at the Rashbam. Meitzah Reuven Mizrach Umayriv. I want to describe its perimeter. The Yesh L'Shchenoi Reuven Beis Sadais. He actually has a neighbor that owns a sada on either side of him. Achas b'mizrach v'achas b'mayr. And then Ulashimon Shchenoi Shtei Sadais Achas b'tzafon v'achas b'dara. Lo yichtav lo stam. You shouldn't be vague and write sada zu shani moichalach harahi b'soich sadai sadais Reuven v'Shimon. It's in between the fields of Reuven and Shimon. That's because that's not perfectly clear. You know why? The Ostila Miflagalei Ba'alachson Kazet. Maybe he only meant one Reuven and one Shimon, and he's only selling half the field cut apart diagonally. V'nimtza Shenoito Eitzel Meitzer Reuven v'Shimon. He's only going to take the closest part of the field to the one Reuven and the one Shimon. Avokashakaisev Meitzer Reuven Ruchen Tartin. I mean both sides. Umeitzer Shimon Ruchen Tartin. So now he's clearly described, he's clearly described all four directions. The Choshegenim Yichtav Loi Beferish, Meitzer Reuven Mizrach, Umayriv, Meitzer Shimon Tzafon V'Dar, the Shaperdom. But you don't even have to be that clear. You just have to write, Shimon is my neighbor on two sides, and Reuven is my neighbor on two sides. Then that's clear enough to determine that it's all 4 points. Okay, so the Gemara is going through different ways of offering the borders to a field. Now you want to tear your hair, just say it properly, all 4 borders. But someone who's always trying to push the envelope and be as vague as possible, but is it clear enough? So we have 3 consecutive back-to-back shilas. What if you only made 4 dots. You made 4 dots. These are the 4 corners of the field. What if you did that? Dr. Rashba. Sim lois akronis. Loshen Simon. So you saw this harbe. So he might have had 10 people on each. He might be selling a very large field, and he might have 10 neighbors on each of his 4 sides. He didn't even discuss that. Arba Sodois, Shel Dalit Kronois, Hasoda. All he did was he gave the location of the 4 corners of the field. But he didn't describe at all the actual borders. So do we say Ein Der Limkar Karnois Hasoda? No one's just looking to sell a little patch at the corner. He means to sell all of the field that's included within a straight line that you would draw from point to point. That's why he pointed out the 4 corners. Or maybe maybe you draw, instead of drawing, normally when you go from point to point, you take the shortest distance, but maybe you don't do that. Maybe you go diagonally across. And maybe when he itemized these 4 points, he meant to say a couple of rows that run diagonally across, that crisscross each other, and he's just selling an X. Maybe that's what he means. Okay? That was question number 1. Question number 2. What if he just described part of the border for each corner? So instead of just a dot of each corner, he described an L at each corner. Let's see the Rashbam. Kimin game. It was a Greek letter game, and it looked like a chaf, basically like an L. Oh, but I'm sorry. I wrongfully said all 4 corners. He just did it on 2 corners, but it has a little bit of each of the 4 walls. So v'nimtza shemeitzer tchilas kol ruach, because he did give us a little bit of each border, but he didn't fill in the entire perimeter. In timtza loimer kabisayim lois akronis. If you're going to say in the last case where he only pointed out the 4 dots, if you're going to say there the loikana elo keneged akronis, there you only say he's kind of that X, that small little area of the points. There he didn't say anything about the actual side perimeters of the field. Maybe there he means just to give a strip of land. Maybe that you consider it as if it's the whole wall. Though for Erevin purposes, we consider that a good wall, right? Maybe again, you're only kind of the direct strip of land that's in between the 2 L's, which will be a strip of land that runs diagonally across his property. So that was the second question that was asked. The third question that was asked is, turning on Tamid Beis, Bisirugin Mahu. Bisirugin is somebody who wanted to be a little bit funny, the way he described it. And let's say, if you look at the square here at the bottom, he had two neighbors on each side. Reuven and Shimon on the east, Levi and Yehuda on the north, Yisachar and Zevulun on the west, and Yosef and Binyamin in the south. And you said, Reuven, Levi, Yisachar, Yosef. So you identified half of each perimeter. What would Allah be? So what are the options? One option is that he's koine the entire field, and the other option is he's only koine a whole bunch of triangles. You could see in the picture, like on the corner, right? See what the koine. So he's only koine half of the field, but not a nice piece of 50 by 100. There's a whole bunch of triangles, not randomly, but dispersed equally throughout the field. Let's have a look at the Rishpah. Bisrugan Mayu. Kagoy show you Makivin Oisoi Shmoina B'nei There are what I love about these Rishpams are there. You know the game called charades, where you have to act out something, and if you could just draw it, it would be so much easier. But you're only allowed to act it out. So that's how I look at. I try to look at the Rashbam without the picture, like charades, and then eventually they just made a picture to make it easy for us. But I like to see how it's a very big talent to be able to describe something accurately without showing a picture. So I like how the Rashbam took on that task to describe with words something that really needs a picture to give over. So for instance, Reuven v'Shimon min Mizrach, Levi v'Yehuda min Tzafon, Yisachar Zvulun min Ma'ariv, and Yosef ben Binyamin min Adar. The thoughts of what he wrote is not a full list. Reuven Meitzer Mizrach, Levi Meitzer Tzafon, Yisachar Meitzer Ma'ariv, and Yosef Meitzer Adar. So he only listed half of each border. If you're going to answer in the last shaila that giving 2 partial walls does not make you be kind of the whole field, here you gave 4 partial walls, so maybe it's better. Sometimes people will sell a row, a clear row, that's at least one big piece of property between 2 fields. No one is selling such a crazy distribution of a field. And therefore, for there's very good reason to suggest that it was a tirch of him to write every single neighbor that he had. So he gave you every second one, but you got a good idea of what the perimeter of the field was. Or, I don't know, the guy's a nutbar, and he wants to split up his field in a weird way. Okay, the Gemara answers for all the shilas taken. Meitzer loy meitzer rishon, umeitzer sheni, umeitzer shlifa. What if he gave 3 sides, all 3 sides, but umeitzer revi loy meitzer loy, but he didn't clearly state the 4th border. Amar Rav Kana Hakoil, chutz mi meitzer revi. You'll be kind of all 4 sides, except for 1 row up against the 4th border. Zokter Rashbam, all of the land that would have been inside that he described. But that 1 row, I'll tell him, so make sure that's what he meant. By leaving out the 4th border, he was specifically trying to retain that 1 row for himself. Okay, that was Rav Shita. Shmuel Amar, Afilu Meitzer Revi, you're kind of everything. The Haidalai Kasvei, you know why I didn't write it? Because you got the message. He gave you all 3 sides. You can figure out what the 4th side will be. That's the second shita. Rabbi Asi Amar Loi Kana El Telamechad Al Panei Kula. He all he was kind of is 1 row. Let's say he gave the east, the north, and the west. He's kind of 1 row along the eastern border, 1 row along the western border, and 1 row along the northern border. And all of the inside, he is not kind. So Zok to Gemara, Sover Lo Karav, the Amish Yuri Shire, he agrees to Rav Keneged Shmuel that he's not including the whole field since he didn't detail the 4th side, except he holds with the Shire B'Meitzer, Shire Nara B'Kuli. Rav said he just meant to leave over 1 row, the row on the border that he didn't outline. But Rav Ashi, I agree, he meant to leave over, but you're giving too much. Maybe he meant to leave over everything. He just wanted to give 1 row away at each border that he identified. Zokt the Rashbam tell Mechal Pekula Etzel Gimel Hamitzarim Kemin Ches. Savala Rav Asi Karav, he holds like Rav that the person is trying to retain something for himself. Damar the Idle Kasvim Mishum Dishir Sharalat Minnesota. But Vadifa the Rav Asi Midarav, but Rav Asi holds that he was holding back a lot more for himself because of Rav Asi Mideshire Lametzar. Once he left out 1 border, Shire Nami Lakula Sada Shekanegana Metzar. He's retaining for himself all of the field that's connected that border. The whole inside of the U. Umiyu Ahani Gimel Mitzarim Shekasav Liknois Porta. Something is included in the sale, and that is the bare minimum of 1 row parallel to each of the 3 borders that he outlined. Okay, so let's see what the halach is over here. That that we say, let's say in Rav, the Loikana Meitzer Revi, that the Rav says you're missing one row. You're missing one row of the fourth border that he didn't list. The only way you say that row is not included in the sale, Ela Deloy Mivla. That's if the three borders that he gave didn't reach all the way to the fourth border. It was, let's say, a row short of the fourth border. So that last row that Rav says is excluded from the sale, not only wasn't it included in the borders, it's actually out of the borders. That's when we say it wasn't included in the sale. Aval Mivla. But if all of the land connected the border that he actually outlined for the east and the west, all of that land he will be kind. He's only kind of land that would have been passed there. Aval Mivla kan. And not only that, even if it was loy mivla, you need more conditions for it not to be kind of. Only if it's a property that has a cheshivas that could stand on its own because it has a row of decorum, which makes it distinct, something that you would carve out and keep for yourself, or v'havatish's cabin, or it was big enough of a field that you could plant 9 cabin, so it's something that makes sense. Somebody would have carved out. Avaleka alei richva de dikla. Well, I have a tish's cabin, kana, it would be kana, because it's not logical to say that just because he left out that fourth border, he meant to retain such an insignificant, useless piece of property. Okay, gewaltig. However, Michlal, so let's analyze this. So based on what we just said, based on these exclusions, the chimuvla, if the last row in question is actually contained within the 3 borders, then even if it was a significant piece of property that someone might have carved out for himself to keep, he's still including it in the sale because that's what we just said, that if it's included within the 3 borders, he's selling it anyway. So you need 2 factors in order to say that he's retaining it for himself. A is that it's not included in those 3 borders, and B is that it is significant in and of itself that he might have wanted to carve it back for himself. But if it doesn't have both of those items, he's for sure including it in the sale. That was the first approach to what we just said to clarify Rav's words. But Ika de Amri, there was another version of what was said to clarify Rav's words. Amarava hilchasa kana hakoil va'afilu meitzer revi. The law is you're kind of everything, even the 4th meitzar. V'loy amaran, but we don't say that you're kind of all of the field, even the 4th border, the last row as well. V'loy amaran ela de mivla. When did I say that you're kind of everything? That's only if it's fully included in the first 3 borders. Avaloy mivla, but if it's not included in the first 3 borders, loy kani, then you wouldn't be kind. And even if it was included in the first 3 borders, loy amaran ela de leka alei richva de dikla will have a tishakabit. If it's included within the borders, we'll say it was included in the sale, but that's only if it's not significant. Aval ikala richva de dikla the have tishakabit if it was a significant property in and of itself, loy kana, even if it was within those borders. So it's a little bit different than what we said before. Michlal, here you'll see a little bit different than what we said before. The chiloi muvla, if it wasn't muvla, afal the leka alea richla de dikla, even if it wasn't significant, will it have a tish's cabin loikani? So let's look at the common ground between these 2 lashonos, and let's see where they are. So if it's within the border of the field and it's insignificant, both lashonos agree that it was sold, right? If it was out of the borders, out of the 3 borders, and it was significant, both lashonos agree that it was not sold. Where is there a machlokes? If it's significant but it's within the borders, or if it's insignificant and it's out of the borders, that's when there's a machlokes between the 2 lashonos. The first lashon held it would be sold. The second lashon held that it wouldn't be sold. So shaminim tevayu lishni, what we can find as common ground between these two lashonos is Shomim Tavai Lishon the Rava. What we do have common ground between the two lashonos of Rava are the Besada, Loi, Shire, Velamidi. Anything that's in the field is for sure sold. In other words, for sure not like the Shita of Rabasi, who said it's just the three borders. Which means Dami, the Heicha de Mivla, if it is included within the borders, and Veleka Alei Richva Dikla Velahavatish Kabin, so size within those three borders, and it's not significant to have carved it out for yourself, Kala. Both Lashonis agree to that. Both Lashonis also agree, Loi Mivla, if it's not within the borders, the Ika Alei Richva Dikla Velahavatish Kabin, if it's out of the borders, and it's very significant, so it makes sense that it was carved out as its own property, Loi Kala. Where is there a disagreement between these two Lashonos? Mivla ve'ikala or loy mivla ve'lekala. Itmar lalahagisa, itmar lalahagisa. We have two lashonos of Rav, and there are those who paskin like one lashon that it would have been included in the sale, and there are those who say the other lashon says it wasn't included in the sale. So what do you know, lachlamaisa? Zaklamar shuda the daini. The dain has to look at the situation and figure out what he thinks what happened. So the interesting thing here is normally, when the Gemara has two lashonos and doesn't resolve it, the Gemara usually concludes Hamochim Mechaber Al Harai. But here, the Gemara specifically took a position of Shuda Dedaini. So the Rashbam speaks out that this you would only conclude Shuda Dedaini if the Gemara concludes Shuda Dedaini. And the Gemara is telling you how to deal with it. Because if the Gemara just quotes two lashonos, the normal way you deal with it is with a Hamochi Mechaverei, all of our ayah. Let's have a look if I could find the chelik of the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, "Me'achar the misaf kolom." Since we don't know which way to go, in a case where it's either not within the borders or it's or it is significant, navit shuda. We do shuda, which is hakoy lefi ha'inyan sheyiru hadayonim v'yakiru hamoicher in a yafe or in a ra. Bezin makes a call. Do they think in this particular case he meant to sell that or not? In other places in Shas where there are two lashonos that remain unresolved, we never say shuda dedaini. Normally, you would never say shuda dedaini unless the Gemara specifically concludes with a shuda dedaini. Rather, what you would normally do is ala mochi mechaver olavarah. So this is a unique case where the Rabbanan told us how to deal with this suffix. Omar Rabba. Rabba said, Palga de Isli Ba'ara Pliga. What happens is if Reuben and Shimon were equal partners in the property, and Reuben decides that he wants to sell his share to Levi. So what he said was, Palga de Isli Ba'ara Pliga. They changed the issue to Pliga. So one is Palga and one is Pliga. So half of the property that I own, I'm selling to you. So the question here is, do I mean I'm selling you half of the property, which is all of my interest in the property, or am I selling you half of my interest in the property? So Rabbi told us that if someone said Palga, half the Isli Ba'ara that I have in this property, Pliga, I want to sell you that half, the halach is Palga. I'm sorry, I didn't read this right. Palga the Isli Ba'ara Palga. If I said I'm selling you, if I'm selling you half of the property, meaning my interest in the property, Palga, I'm selling the full half. I just butchered up what I said a little bit, so I'm going to start over. I'll take a fresh start. Amar Rabba, if he said Palga the Isli Ba'ara, half the interest that I have in this property, I'm selling to you. The halacha is Palga, you've sold the entire half. You've sold your entire interest in the property. But if the words he used was Palga de Isli Ba'ara, I'm selling you Palga de Isli Ba'ara. I'm selling you the half that I have in this land. So Palga, I have half the land. I'm a partner with Reuben. Reuben and Shimon are partners. And Reuben goes to Levi and says, I'm selling you palgo de isli ba'ara. I'm selling you half that I have in the land. So it means palgo, it means I'm selling you my entire half. And the word palga is half of the field, not half of what I own. But if I said palga ba'ara de isli, so instead of putting the word de isli first, you put ba'ara first, palga ba'ara de isli, then I'm selling half of the land that I have. I only own half, so I'm only selling you a quarter. Riva. Okay, let's see the Rashbam. Amar Rabba, Reuven the Shimon Shoyalem saw the Beshutvis, Reuven and Shimon that owned the field in the partnership. And Reuven sold his part to Levi because of Lakay. This is what he wrote. Halga de Isli Ba'ara, and I'm selling you the half that I have in this property, then it's half. But if I said Palga the Ara de Isli, it's Rivela Zavanlay. Zavanlay Rivia saw that he only sold 1/4 of the field, and he Chatzi Chelkai, he's selling half of what he owed. This is what he means to say. I'm selling you half of the property that I own. Nimta Mechatzi Asada Sheyeshlai, the half of the field that Reuben owns, Machar Chatzi, he sold half of his interest in it. The Hainu Revia Kol Asad. So this subtle arrangement of the words make a big difference. If you say Palga de Isli first and then Ba'ara, you mean to sell your entire interest in the field which you're identifying as half the field. But if you're saying Palga the Ba'ara first and then the Isli, you're saying I'm only selling you half of the portion that I have.
You would add a thought.
I'm sorry?
In English, we would just say, I am selling you half, either I'm selling you the half of the land that I own, or I'm selling you half of the land.
Right, so in most of these cases, you tear your hair. Why can't you just be more detailed, right? Put the borders of what you're selling him. We're dealing with the aftermath of people who wrote vague language. So Zok the Gemara, Amalei Abaye asked his Rebbe, I don't understand why. They're both the same. Why would you make such a subtle distinction based on the order of his words? And Ishtik, Rabbah was silent. So we just had a minute ago, when Rav was silent, that meant that Rav accepted what his Talmidim told him of Khan and Basi. So Abaye also thought he got lucky the same way. Amar Abaye, I'm not sorry, I thought, Mida Ishtik, if Rabbah was silent, and when I corrected him, Kibula Kapla, that he actually accepted it from me. But boy, was I surprised. Because Chazina, Hanu story, the Nafki Mi Beimar, I actually saw stories, samples of the two cases that we just discussed, that Rabbah paskined on, and he wrote on them exactly what he paskined. Uksiv b'huachi, Palga de Isli ba'ara, he wrote Palga. This guy is going to get half the field. But if the star said Palga ba'ara de Isli, he only awarded to the Lakeach a quarter. So basically, Rabbah just ignored him. Rabbah wasn't agreeing to him. It's like when we used to take our tests for smicha, there would be a one-on-one with you and Rabbi Forsman. Rabbi Forsman, like for instance, the Pahar on Basra B'cholov, on Terubis, was a one-on-one 2 to 2.5 hour test, just firing questions at you. So if Shaila came in, because he was answering Shailas from the public while he was giving the fair. So if a Shaila would come in while you were taking the fair that was somewhat relevant to your fair, he would go like this. Yeah. 1 minute, please. She wants to know if the flesh is the mix of the milk is the flesh about the milk about what's the look, huh? So you think to put scrape shift throughout the food just to catch the pot. Okay. It's fine, you don't have to do anything. That's what you do all the time. So that's mamish what happened over here. Rabbi says, okay, very good, Abai, and then he just passes like he basking. I always wonder where it for got it from. Probably got it from this rabbi.
Doesn't even warrant the response.
He's always do it. He's the love doing it. Zok to Gemara, I actually have a shtickle fraudulent smicha, because what I did is I got a friend's wife to call up. I devised a shaila that was so complex. It involved a million different students and different sachen from the Piskachuva and from the Kiveger. And I asked her to ask the perfect blend of questions, and I prepared the answer, Gavaltic. So in the middle of the fair, she calls him, and then he asked her Shaila. I was waiting for it, knew it was going to come, and I answered it perfectly. So really, my smicha might be fraudulent, but it was fun anyway. The V'omer Rabba, Meitzar Ara demina palga. Oh, here's the pliga one. Right, here's where I mixed up the gears. V'amarav meitzer ara demina pliga palga. What happens if I only want to sell half my field? If I'm only selling half my field, I can't. My field is bordered by Reuben on one side and by Shimon on the other side. But if I'm only selling you half my field, I'm going to say I'm going to sell you a field. One of the border is Shimon, but the other border is me. The part of the field that I'm planning to keep for myself, right? Because that's the new border. So what have he said? One of the boundaries of the property that I'm selling you is the property that I'm cutting in half, that I'm keeping, but he didn't say half. He said, I'm taking part of it to the halach is palga. What he means to do is sell half the field. Because I'm just saying I'm one of your neighbors, but how much of the field, of my field, am I selling you? It's not crystal clear. But if you use the words, one boundary is me because I'm splitting my land, that means palga, he's selling half the land. But what if he used a slightly different word? Meitzer ara demina psika. The other border is my property that I cut off. So then tisha kabin. Then when you say cut off, it means minimum. I cut off a field that's the minimum size field in which you would plant tisha kabin. So depending on his word, it'll have a different meaning. Amalei Abaye, again Abaye argued with Rabbi. Why should it make a difference? My shnachi, my shnachi. And again Ishtik. Savar mina. So he thought, Edi v'Edi. So Abaye thought, Edi v'Edi palgas. Abaye thought that because of that, Rabbi was masking that regardless it should be a half. But v'lohi, that's not halacha l'maisa. What is halacha l'maisa? The Amar Rav Yemer bar Shlamya l'didi mirfresh lamineda Abaye. Let me explain to you what Abaye ended up concluding, and it's not that they both mean half. Rather, it doesn't matter what he used. He holds the difference between those two Lashonos are insignificant, and they shouldn't make any difference at all. Bein meitzer ara demina pliga, or bein meitzer ara demina psika. Either way, it would have the same halacha, and it would depend on something else. It would depend on if he's more descriptive. The Amarla, if the Moicher adds the following clause into the star, Elon mitzarnaha. If he adds those words, these are its borders, that's a lashon of wanting to give more. By being more clear with the borders, you're showing more of a moicher be'ayin yafa, and therefore palga, you've sold half. But lo yamar le alan mitzarnaha, if you didn't write this extra clause into the star, tisha kabin, you really only mean to sell him a minimal portion of your field, which would be enough to plant tisha kabin. Okay, we'll stop here, Hashem, and we'll be mamshech tomorrow. There was not one geometrical formula in the entire daf. All the pictures.
That's what Rabbi meant by. Is that what Abaye is saying?
I think it's an Abaye. I don't think it's what Rabbi meant. He makes it clear in the Rashbam. This is what Abaye meant earlier. It shouldn't make a difference. So don't think that what Abaye meant to say is that they shouldn't make a difference. There are differences, except those words don't have an impact. These words do have an impact.